Well, welcome back, everybody, as we travel down this path, down the hydroplate controversy and looking at the original documents and what the AIG has said, what ICR has said. And so we're going to take a look at a summary, and I'll show you how to get to that. Let me share this screen. Excuse me. And to find these documents, you just need to go to hydroplate.org, and then hydroplate resources, go down to hydroplate controversy, and then up to hydroplate timeline. And you can read them all in chronological order. You can see some years there's a lot of things happening, some years nothing happens, and we're getting up towards the end. Helping or hurting? Helping him, Mark Looney, we read that one. We just got done with that one. Let's see, what else do we got? Henry Morris, we read that conversation. We'll just read this. We'll just click on Mark Looney. When you click on it, there it is. And then you go to the next one, and that's going to be helping or hindering. Let's take a peek at that one. And this is from 2009, the way it looks. Monday, August 10th, 2009. Is ICR AIG helping or hindering? A general summary by Pastor Kevin Lee, August 2009. Okay. This general summary, as well as part 1, part 2, and part 3 links will show why people should ignore derogatory comments by AIG and Institute for Creation Research about Dr. Walt Brown's hydroplate theory, which explains the flood of Noah. Background. Ken Ham came to the United States, and after spending a short time with ICR, split off to set up AIG. Since then, these two large organizations have been competing for finite donation dollars from Christian supporters. It is clear from my face-to-face conversations with Ken Ham that he thinks the war against the evolution lie will be most easily won if everyone supported and otherwise marched to the AIG drum. I am sure ICR management wants their drum to be heard and financially supported true, since failure to do so will result in their decline. However, Dr. Walt Brown does not have to drum up support for a large organization. He does not march to the AIG, ICR drums, and he never requests donations. Yet his research and writing in book form and on the web have helped equip hundreds of thousands of people with scientific arguments against the evolution deception. For several years, Ken Ham, AIG America, Creation Ministries International, CMI, formerly AIG Australia. Oh, I didn't know that. AIG, formerly AIG Australia, and ICR have grossly misrepresented Dr. Brown's theories to a wide audience. ICR began this practice in 1984. Many ask why. Is it because competition for the donation dollar required that Dr. Brown must be marginalized and show to be wrong? Otherwise, AIG, ICR will be marginalized. Some refer to this as the not invented here posture. If AIG, ICR didn't invent it, they can't take credit for it and make a buck on it. Therefore, it must be demonized and otherwise labeled as bad science. Those who have read Dr. Brown's work can easily recognize the misrepresentations which are documented in part 2 of this series. But those who have not read Dr. Brown's work because they trusted the AIG and ICR critiques are missing out on learning about the only existing theory that explains 1, where the water came from, and 2, where it went, in a matter that is scientifically valid, is in complete agreement with Scripture, and does not require miracles. Similarly, Dr. Brown's work influenced a very detailed scientific explanation for the formation of the Grand Canyon, which answers most, if not all, of the puzzling questions that have plagued evolutionists and creationists for decades. ICR and AIG do not have a scientifically credible explanation for the formation of the Grand Canyon and do not address the key questions and provide little, if any, scientific evidence. So people who desire biblically and scientifically sound explanation of the flood of Noah and the associated formation of the Grand Canyon should read Dr. Brown's book rather than trusting what AIG and ICR have to say about this theory. The 8th edition of Brown's book, In the Beginning, Compelling Evidence for Creation and the Flood, is available to read or print for free from his website, creationscience.com, and will be available in hard copy in December of 2008. Introduction. This general summary, part 1 and 2, were written and posted here for many attempts, both through face-to-face encounters and written correspondence with Ken Ham, other AIG personnel, Carl Wieland, now Creation Ministries International, and ICR, to get these organizations and individuals to stop their misrepresentation and their campaign against Dr. Brown's work. These efforts failed, although to a varying degree, AIG and ICR have acknowledged that they have misrepresented Dr. Brown's work and they have refused to correct their errors. Part 3 documents my attempts in 2008 and July 2009 to get AIG to correct the Grand Canyon display in their museum, which depict information that ICR's Steve Austin plagiarized from Dr. Brown's discoveries and then repackaged into bad science, which he published in his own book. These attempts have also failed. A history of bias and malice. The following are a few of many examples of unprofessional behavior that these stalwart creation ministries. Okay, I'm just going to make that a little bit bigger. Okay, a little bit smaller. There we go. That'll work. Example 1, AIG distributes to the public Baumgartner's inaccurate and misleading critique of Brown's work. For several years, people who wrote or called AIG asking their opinion of Dr. Brown's hydroplate theory were given a standard response written by Dr. Baumgartner, who at the time was employed by ICR. Dr. Baumgartner left ICR in July of 2008. Dr. Baumgartner's response grossly misrepresents Dr. Brown's theory, and he made no attempt to contact Dr. Brown to ensure his paper was accurate before giving it to AIG. AIG also made no attempt to ensure the paper was accurate before sending it out to others. Dr. Baumgartner has a conflict of interest in the matter because he has been trying to gain acceptance for his own catastrophic plate tectonic theory. It should be noted that Henry Morris III acknowledged in August 2008 that the catastrophic plate tectonic theory requires miracles in order to work as an explanation for the biblical flood. AIG was aware of Dr. Baumgartner's competing theory and therefore should have been aware of the conflict of interest. For this reason, as well as normal professional courtesy, they should have contacted Dr. Brown to ensure Baumgartner's critique was accurate before publishing. However, they did not. Example 2, when confronted, AIG pulls Baumgartner's paper but makes no effort to correct the error for the public. After several years of ignoring this practice by AIG, Dr. Brown wrote to AIG in 2001 documenting the errors in Baumgartner's paper. As a result, AIG stopped distributing Baumgartner's response, but have done nothing to correct the misrepresentation that they sent to thousands of people. Example 3, AIG, Ham, discourages production of a video about Brown's hydroplate theory and promises that AIG will not distribute it if it is produced. In 1998-99, a video producer who had done work for AIG called Ken Ham to get his opinion about animating Dr. Brown's hydroplate theory. Ken Ham strongly encouraged the video producer not to do so and said that if he did produce this video, AIG would not carry or promote it. Ken Ham is entitled to choose what AIG will and will not sell. But when I asked Mr. Ham in a face-to-face meeting why he felt this way, he admitted he never read Dr. Brown's book. He then proceeded to misquote Dr. Brown's work. Why is Ken Ham so adamant that he would not carry a video that had not yet been produced about a theory he had not studied? Is it because Ham has no interest in anything that isn't discovered by AIG, ICR insiders, even if it would be of value to the Christian community? Example 4, AIG website labels Brown theory as doubtful, claiming without documentation, no significant support of the creationist geological community. For several years, AIG had a section on their website that was titled Doubtful, so don't use at present. Dr. Brown's hydroplate model was listed on this page with a statement that it had not attracted significant support from the creationist geological community. After extensive correspondence between Dr. Brown, Carl Wieland of AIG, and me, this statement was pulled from the AIG website. Others and I have asked AIG for the list of those creation geologists who are purportedly skeptical of Dr. Brown's theories, but AIG has not produced any names. People who have heard this argument against Dr. Brown's theory should realize AIG is probably talking about two geologists, Steve Austin and Andrew Snelling. Assuming this to be the case, let's see if they are credible critics of Dr. Brown. Two critics, are they credible? No. Steve Austin. For background, Walt Brown spent 1 year in 1987-88 studying the Grand Canyon and seeking to discover how it formed. After making some very important and unique discoveries in the surrounding high country, he was the first to publish data on the elevation, name, location, and breach point of a former lake that Dr. Brown called Grand Lake, and how this lake relates to the formation of the Grand Canyon. Steve Austin, who at the time was employed at ICR, but who, as of July of 2008, is no longer an ICR employee, who was also supposing, his word, the concept that the Grand Canyon was a post-flood related marvel created by a large lake that breached a dam. However, he focused on the wrong lake, Hopi Lake, and did not address, let alone answer, several perplexing questions. For example, what uplifted the massive Colorado Plateau 6,200 feet above sea level? Had that not happened, the mile-deep Grand Canyon would not exist. How did Grand Canyon form, and how did both Grand Lake and Hopi Lake breach and flow over the high Kaibab Plateau? Where did the 800 cubic miles of dirt that was carved out of the Grand Canyon go? Dr. Brown laid out dozens of evidences to support his Grand Lake discoveries and explanation. Austin did not make original deep breach dam discoveries, but used Brown's Grand Lake explanation and provided few, if any, evidences of his own. Dr. Austin purchased Dr. Brown's book in August of 1989, and for several years afterwards took credit for plagiarized Dr. Brown's discoveries. Austin began by backdating an ICR publication, trying to claim priority, and later published as his own key information from Dr. Brown's work, including the name of Grand Canyon. He then began telling others that Dr. Brown had plagiarized his work. When confronted by Dr. Brown about this, he denied it in writing, that he had accused Dr. Brown of plagiarizing Austin's work. Despite his denials, Austin continues this slander as late as August 3rd, 2008, at the ICC conference in a conversation with Joe Bardwell. To this day, Dr. Austin has provided a scientifically sound explanation for how Grand Lake formed, how it breached its dam. To this day, Dr. Austin has not provided any scientifically sound explanation for how Grand Lake formed, how it breached its dam, how it cut through the Kaibab Plateau, because he could not and cannot. All he could do was plagiarize what he could of Dr. Brown's work without embracing Dr. Brown's hydroplate theory, explanations of the hows of these critical details. Austin and Dr. Henry Morris II, after denying Austin's unethical practices, signed an agreement on June 21st, 1994 to correct Austin's misstatements in any future printing of his book, to insert an errata sheet in the remaining inventory of the current edition. These actions resulted from evidence brought before a Christian mediation panel of 4 judges on June 21st, 1994. However, as the mediation meeting was breaking up, Austin requested an exemption on the errata sheet because his final edition was, he said, almost gone. The next edition would contain all the corrections. Brown said that would be fine if fewer than 1,000 copies of his book remained. The mediators agreed. However, for the next 3 months, Austin refused to provide the count of the number of books remaining, despite dozens of efforts, phone call, and letters by Brown to get that number. Finally, on September 24th, 1994, Brown asked Austin to join him in a phone call to Don Rohr, ICR's business director, who certainly knew how many books remained at the time of the mediation. Austin replies, "It's none of your business." Therefore, Brown called Dr. Rohr, who confirmed that more than 1,000 books remained on June 21st, 1994. Brown then contacted all involved, including Austin and the head mediator, and announced that Austin had eviscerated the mediation agreement. False statements continue to this day, and some were reproduced in Red Rock Pass, Spillway of the Bonneville Flood by Austin, published in ICR in July of 2008, when Austin still worked for ICR. Austin has taken deceptive measures to conceal his plagiarism, including changing the names of Grand Lake after using it for 3 years to Canyonlands Lake. After the mediation referred to above, Austin made the following statement in a letter to the lead mediator, Professor Pete Robertson, dated August 29, 1994. Unfortunately, I did not reference Brown as the source of the name Grand Lake until 1993 issue of Grand Canyon Field Study Tour Guide. That lack of citation of Brown in the earlier edition, 1990 and 1992, of the Field Guidebook may have led some to believe that I was the source of the name of Grand Lake. That supposition is, of course, incorrect. Austin's confession that he plagiarized the name of Grand Lake from Dr. Brown before he changed it to Canyonlands Lake is one of the rare moments where Austin told the truth. It follows months of lying to Brown and the mediation panel that he had independently come up with the Grand Lake explanation. He continues to falsely claim he independently discovered Grand Lake and its breach point, which the written record shows he came up with after reading Dr. Brown's work. I pray for his sake that Austin will also come clean on these lies that are adversely affecting creationists. Austin's deceptions are fully documented in Part 3 and in the book I am co-authoring with Pastor Diego Rodriguez entitled Canyonlands Lake, Monument to Plagiarism. Canyonland Lake, the true history of the discovery of the origin of Grand Canyon, what ICR and AIG don't want you to know. Wow. Andrew Snelling, another creation geologist associated with AIG and ICR, who has gone on the record as disagreeing with Dr. Brown's hydroplate theory, is Dr. Andrew Snelling. Before looking at Snelling's credibility as a critic of Dr. Brown, it is important to know some background. Both Snelling and Austin received their doctorates from secular universities whose geology is based on evolution. Even if they were both able to keep evolutionary lies from penetrating their minds, they at least had to be less than honest during their exams, repeating back the professors the evolutionary dogma in order to make the grade. Once someone becomes accustomed to telling people what they want to hear, despite what they believe the facts to be, what keeps them from continuing this dishonest practice? In fact, Steve Austin wrote creation papers for ICR under a pen name, Stuart Nevins, during his postgraduate training to prevent his university from finding out he was an undercover creationist. It is easy to see how this deception led to plagiarism, which later, to cover his tracks, required lying. The cover-up is often worse than the original misdeed. In the case of Snelling, the lack of integrity at the university did not stop after receiving his PhD. In 1990, when Snelling was writing a scientific paper for Hughes, published by the Australian Institution of Mining and Metallurgy, Melbourne, he mentions weathering and erosion patterns of 150 million years, regional metamorphism lasting from 1870 to 1800 million years ago, and other ancient dates. But when working for a creation organization, Snelling writes as a young earth creationist. A Google search on Snelling provides documentation of this unethical behavior in publishing writings. When confronted about this inconsistency, Snelling defends himself by saying that he was forced, his word, to write what his employers expected to hear. So while working with the creationists, he was forced to support the scientifically bankrupt canopy theory when it was in vogue. Was he forced to support the scientifically bankrupt canopy theory when it was in vogue? Is he now forced to be on the equally unscientific and, more important, unbiblical catastrophic plate tectonic theory bandwagon in order to be part of the AIG, ICR in crowd? In summary, we must be very wary of the credibility of certain geologists with a doctorate from a secular university, as we would a so-called Christian pastor who has a doctorate in Buddhism. Some Buddhist teaching would probably come from the pulpit. With that in mind, Snelling was once again asked to submit a written critique of the hydroplate theory. He declined on November 4th, 1992, saying, "It is not that I don't believe in amateurs," meaning Walt Brown and others, having a role in the process. But if amateurs and those with deficient knowledge are left to build and elevate a flood model, then there is no way that it will ultimately be satisfactory and successful. If those of us who have a professional geological background are still struggling to reach consensus among ourselves, for example, Steve Austin, Kurt Wise, a PhD geologist in paleontology from Harvard University, where the famous evolutionist Stephen Gould has his principal advisor, and myself, then it is hard to see how the short term there's going to be consensus among a wider circle, which includes both amateurs and professionals. Dr. Brown is a National Science Foundation Fellow with a PhD in mechanical engineering from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, probably the most prestigious scientific and engineering university and graduate school in the world. Brown also has a long list of scientific career achievements. While his doctoral degree is in engineering, not in geology, he is not an amateur in geological issues involving the flood. Why doesn't Snelling use his geology education to enter into a written scientific debate that Brown has been offering for years, but which ICR and AIG and other employees refuse to take part in? Again, why? Dr. Brown has taken college courses in geology, and he did not hide the fact that he was a creation scientist. Dr. Brown's credentials, professionalism, and honesty gave him much favor with the late Dr. Bob Dietz, who received the 1988 Penrose Medal from the Geological Society of America. The Penrose Medal is awarded annually to the most eminent American geologist who has not yet received the medal. Although Brown and Dietz differed on many fundamental issues, they quickly became friends and respected each other's scientific abilities. Note, Dietz was one of the founders of the evolutionary plate tectonic theory and was the one credited with the concept of seafloor spreading as required by plate tectonics. Austin and Snelling embraced the same evolutionary model, except they believed various miracles caused it to happen millions of times faster. They named their theory catastrophic plate tectonics and teach it to Christian lay audiences. Dr. Dietz, in his private conversations with Walt Brown, frequently acknowledged problems with plate tectonics. At Dr. Dietz's invitation, he and Dr. Brown met for 3 hours each week for a year to discuss evolution versus creation, secular geology versus the flood, and the plate tectonic theory versus the hydroplate theory. These hundreds of hours of discussion resulted in Dr. Brown adding much new information to his book, which, among many other things, gives 15 reasons why subduction and seafloor spreading has not, cannot, and will not occur. In a letter to Bob Cordes, 1988, Snelling wrote, I'm not the only trained geologist who has critiqued the Brown hydroplate theory. Steve Austin has also outlined his geological concerns with the theory. As a consequence, there has been some bad blood. According to Dr. Brown, this is hardly an honest statement because Austin has never outlined his concerns. After reading the above, Dr. Brown wrote to Snelling to explain, in a face-to-face conversation with Steve Austin on June 21st, 1994, he told me he didn't understand the hydroplate theory. He not only did not understand it, it appeared he never tried to understand it. Therefore, I explained a few things dealing with mountain formation and the Kaibab upward faulting within the Grand Canyon, especially at monoclines, some physical reasons why subluxation and mantle convection cannot occur, and a very important engineering phenomena called the buckling of a beam on an elastic foundation. Austin had no comment. In fact, he seemed unable to respond. I turned to Henry Morris, who was standing next to us, and said, "What are your reactions, Henry?" He smiled and said, Sounds good to me. Morris then invited me to visit ICR sometime. In the same letter, Snelling wrote, Walt Brown submitted his theory to the third ICC International Creation Conference, Conference on Creationism in 1994, and I ended up writing a critique. The relevant paperwork is still in files at the AG office, but I am still hoping to have access to those files again soon. If I can achieve that, then I would be able to send you a copy of that critique. Dr. Brown responds, no, Snelling didn't submit a critique. He simply said he would provide no critique because some of us were amateurs. The essence of his letter is quoted above. The group in Minneapolis was disappointed that Snelling would not comment. nor did Snelling's letter relate to any ICC conference, as I have explained. It dealt with the Minneapolis Flood Project, an effort to compare, contrast, and critique different ideas concerning the flood. Snelling is confused. Snelling goes on his letter to Curtis saying the major problem with the hydroplate theory is the logistics of having a layer of water as distinct entity around the globe under the continents and under the ocean floor. But with careful reading, this is what the Bible says, and the flood was a result of the fountains of the great deep bursting up in one day. So Snelling doesn't just have a problem with Dr. Brown, he has a problem with what the Bible says. Snelling goes on to say the pressure on such water, a water layer under the overlaying rock would be incredible. Thus, the overlaying rock would have to form a sealed layer to hold the water in. Even the slightest imperfection in the overlying rock would be expanded by the water under such high confining pressure so that it would literally burst forth. With his knowledge of physics, engineering, and mechanics of metals, as well as geology, Dr. Brown has shown how the overlaying highly compressed rock would be sealed despite any imperfections. In summary, 5 miles or more below the surface of the Earth, 1/2 of the estimated thickness of the pre-flood crust, the pressure is so great that the rock would actually flow slowly like tar if the rock were not rigidly contained. In engineering terms, the compression stress of the rock would greatly exceed its crushing strength, causing the rock to creep. In a written response to Dr. Snelling, Dr. Brown concluded, although water cannot flow up through cracks in this situation, it would flow up for limited distances in a special pattern. I will leave it to you, Andrew, to think that through. Let's see if a geologist identifies some of the equilibrium state as the mechanical engineer. Snelling never responded. Finally, Dr. Snelling wrote Curtis, another problem is that Brown's model starts with an oversimplified description of the rock composition of the continents and the ocean floor. I'm not sure what I was referring to when I spoke to you at ICC 98 about the subterranean basalt configuration being wrong. However, I suppose I was referring to the correct distribution of the basalt layer of the ocean floors and the way it goes down under the continents, or so it would seem. Dr. Brown responds to Snelling, yes, the basalt layer does bend down under the thick continents, and the hydroplate theory explains why. This feature, I maintain, presents a problem for CPT and plate tectonics. If you and the other 5 authors of the catastrophic plate tectonic theory ever decide to accept my offer for a thorough published exchange of our respective views, we can go into the details. Conclusion. Since AIG and ICR have relied heavily on the work and influence of these 2 geologists, it is probable they are the sole source for AIG's recommendations against considering Dr. Brown's hydroplate theory because it had not attracted significant support from the creationist geological community. After reading the above, I hope those interested in truth realize that Austin's plagiarism of Dr. Brown's work, Austin's and Snelling's misrepresentation of Dr. Brown's theory, and their false claims about having critiqued it in writing exclude them from being credible critics. Example 5. AIG maligns Brown because he does not publish in their journal. AIG also misled people by saying that Dr. Brown knows his theory is weak because he is unwilling to defend it by publishing in their peer-reviewed technical journal. Since 1986, John Baumgartner has told audiences that story. Nevertheless, he and others in his circle, including AIG, have declined a written debate with Dr. Brown. The AIG authored technical journal is not a peer-reviewed journal. It would be more accurate to say it is a good old boys reviewed. You publish me, I'll publish you. You sell my books, I'll sell your books journal. What apparently irks AIG is that Dr. Brown refuses to join their boys club, so they publicly castigate him by calling him a lone wolf. On the contrary, Brown probably interacts with more people who call, write, and visit him than Austin and Snelling combined. Anyone who Googles on creation evolution flood will see why. AIG is saying Brown's theory is weak because he does not publish in the technical journal like the other editors of Science magazine, saying that the creationists have no credibility because creation scientists don't publish in the evolution-oriented Science magazine. Such a statement is factually true, but hides the fact they refuse to publish the creationist view and thus disguises their hostility and biases against the creation science community. As we've shown, AIG and ICR hold the same unbiblical and scientifically hostility towards and bias against Dr. Brown and his work. There's no reason for Dr. Brown to try to condense the 220-page hydroplate theory into a short article. The entire 456-page book is available to read or print for free from his website. Why would Brown have to publish in the technical journal, since AIG used this publication to misrepresent his theory, then refused to correct the errors when others pointed them out? Finally, peer-reviewed science journals will not publish material that has already been published, as has the hydroplate theory. Example 6. AIG used plagiarized information from Brown in New Museum. AIG, ICR have continued to misrepresent Dr. Brown's theory and have otherwise acted unprofessionally and unethically toward Dr. Brown to this day. In fact, January 2008, ICR again disseminated false statements about Walt Brown's work in AIG's New Museum featuring information plagiarized from Dr. Brown. Despite attempts by others and me, both organizations have refused to correct their errors. As a result, we have posted my efforts of written correspondence to AIG and ICR with documentation of the historical correspondence between Dr. Brown and Austin Morris, proving Austin's plagiarism as part 3. Readers will be able to decide for themselves whether Austin's AIG, ICR are credible critics of Dr. Brown's work. Disturbing question and possible equally disturbing answer. I spoke with another speaker who also sees AIG using unbiblical and heavy-handed tactics against others besides Brown. That speaker asked me not to use his name because he did not want to come up on Ken Ham's radar screen. Why was he afraid of being on Ham's radar screen? Was it because AIG and ICR might also target him? The historical back-scratching relationship between AIG and ICR has allowed book-selling monies to flow to both organizations. Dr. Brown has made it clear to both organizations that he is not interested in this kind of good old boy relationship, which often corrupts the pursuit of good science. Could this be why they have both misrepresented his work behind his back and blackballed him? Of course, they both deny that these unchristian attitudes could have driven their decisions. But why do AIG and ICR fail to correct the errors and misrepresentations about Brown's hydroplate theory? Is it possible that they worry that Christians' donors might be less generous if they learn that their publications have misled and been inaccurate for so many years? Are donations more important to AIG, ICR than truth and integrity? Are they more important in promoting themselves than creation? Why does AIG campaign against Brown and other creationists who are using their gifts independently of AIG's or ICR's control? Is it possible they want all creationists on their bandwagon so they can continue to elevate their organization in the eyes of the Christian community in order to maximize donations? ICR, AIG failed to point people to Dr. Brown's work on the Grand Canyon so they can learn about a very powerful scientific explanation for how the Grand Canyon formed in a matter of weeks. Why? Is it perhaps because to do so would be embarrassing in light of their prior maligning of Dr. Brown and his work? Why I believe Brown's hydroplate theory provides the best explanation for the flood of Noah. The global flood of Genesis 7 resulted in the death of all land-bound breathing things on the earth except for those preserved on Noah's Ark. This is true because the Bible says so. Any explanation of the flood must be 100% biblical or it is untrue. Explanations that agree with the Bible but require miracles are still possible because the Lord God is a God of miracles. However, miracles should not be used to prop up scientific theories. This is how evolutionists think creationists do science. However, if the flood of Noah can be explained with superior scientific as well as biblical evidence, and at the same time solve dozens of recognized problems within science, then Christians will have a powerful case against the evolutionary lie. After 23 years of technical training in Navy nuclear engineering, 34 years of studying, outlining, and teaching the entire Bible, and 15 years of following the progress of Brown's work, I am convinced, along with many, many others, that the hydroplate theory gives Christians a commanding apologetic tool for the flood of Noah. For example, we can explain why evidence from former salt water was found on Mars. In fact, Dr. Brown predicted it in his work published 3 years before the Mars rover landed and made that discovery. We can also explain why there is methane in Mars' atmosphere, large amounts of water under the Earth's major mountains, an electrically conductive layer under our continents, remnants of supercritical water still inside the Earth, and organic material in comets. On July 4th, 2005, NASA's Deep Impact spacecraft fired a 820-pound bullet into Comet Tempel 1, revealing as never before the composition of the surface layers of a comet. The material blasted from the comet into space included crystalline silicates that could not have formed in very cold outer space, almost minus 460 degrees Fahrenheit, unless the temperature reached 1300 degrees Fahrenheit and then slowly cooled under some pressure. Minerals such as calcium carbonates, limestone, and clays that form only in liquid water, organic material of unknown origin, sodium, which is seldom seen in interplanetary space, very fine dirt like talc powder that was tens of meters deep on the comet's surface. Although the above findings were baffling to evolutionary scientists, everyone is completely consistent with Brown's theory that the material in comets came from the Earth. When the fountains of the Great Deep burst up through a rupture in the Earth's crust, the energy was so immense that some water dirt material was able to escape Earth's gravity and began traveling in elliptical orbits around the sun, and the latter merged to form comets and asteroids. Astronomers sometimes called comets and asteroids the mavericks of the solar system because their origin defies current understanding by conventional astronomy. Based on the scientific evidence of comets, orbits, and other theories that the material in comets came from Earth at the time of the flood, Brown predicts that beyond Pluto's orbit, there is additional mass equal to the mass of Jupiter. Dr. John Anderson of JPL has discovered that a mysterious force was inexplicably slowing the Pioneer and Voyager space probes down as they left the solar system. Dr. Brown's theory explains this anomaly. Earthquake effects. Dr. Brown's theory also explains why earthquakes occur and why every major earthquake causes the Earth to spin slightly faster, something that was widely reported after the December 26, 2004 earthquakes that caused the Indian Ocean tsunamis that killed 225,000 people. His theory also explains why this massive earthquake occurred near the north tips of the 90 East Ridge, why the aftershocks were moving northward, and why the Earth's axis changed slightly. I can go on and on with many scientific facts and recent discoveries that all support the hydroplate theory, and I know of none that could be used to disprove it. Why this matters so much. Satan has invested much in the evolutionary lie because if properly packaged, evolutionists can very effectively sterilize a believer and harden the heart of non-believers to the point where they have only scorn for the Bible and Christians who speak of the gospel and follow Christ. If someone can be convinced that evolution is the truth, then they are swayed to believe that the biblical account of creation is a fairy tale, a lie, and they will never consider anything else the Bible says. The Bible teaches that we are in a spiritual war against Satan and his demons, Ephesians 6. In this war, we are to pull down the lies of the enemy. For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God for pulling down strongholds, casting down arguments and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. 2 Corinthians 10:3. It is clear from this passage that this was and is not one that this war is not won by fleshly tactics, but by spiritual weapons. The greatest weapon we have as Christians is the truth. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. It was Jesus' refusal to depart from the truth that so angered the powers of his day. If Jesus would have only refrained from his claim to be the king of the Jews, then Pilate might have refused to go along with the Pharisees. If Jesus had heaped accolades on the scribes and Pharisees rather than expose their pride and corruption, then maybe they would not have been enraged to the point of saying, "We consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and not that the whole nation should perish." John 11:50. But it was impossible for Jesus to lie. John 8:55 and Hebrews 6:18. And the mission of the Father can only be served by the truth. If it is impossible for God to lie, then if God's desire to dwell in our hearts by the power of his Spirit, then it should be our goal to never lie, never to tell a lie also. Therefore, all Christians and Christian organizations involved in the creation message should cease from telling fairy tales, like the canopy theory and the unbiblical, unscientific, catastrophic plate tectonic theory, even if it requires sacrificing closely attached agendas. Conclusion. Dr. Brown has stated many times that he will correct any misinformation, biblical or scientific, that is contained in his written work. In fact, he has done so many times during the 8 editions of his book. He welcomes a written debate. It is my hope, readers, that you will see through the AIG and ICR campaigns against Dr. Brown and consider adding hydroplate theory explanation to your list of apologetic tools. In doing so, you will be better equipped to tear down the lies of the enemy as you seek to witness to the lost. I should also note that copies of a preliminary version of the Revision 4 postings were sent to ICR, AIG, Dr. Steve Austin, and Dr. John Baumgardner, asking them to point out any inaccuracies that may exist in the above discourse. To date, I have not received any response from them. If I do receive a response that documents an error in my part, then a correction will be made and posted immediately. This Revision 5 posting has only activated the Part 3 link, which points to my June 6, 2009 documentation detailing Austin's plagiarism and bad science, and AIG's, ICR's year-long refusal to get it out of the AIG Museum. This July 6, 2009 documentation was also sent to ICR, AIG, and Dr. Austin asking for their comments or corrections. As of August 7th, 2009, no one has responded with concerns about accuracy. The letters of these men and their responses, if any, are part of the Part 3 posting. Wow. Boy, Pastor Lee put some work into this, and coming up is going to be Canyon Creationist Review. Wow. Okay. So that was the summary. What did we look at there? Okay. That was helping or hindering. Summary. ICR AIG helping or hindering. 2009 Revision 5. Pastor Lee has put a lot of work into this, and hopefully his worth will lead to the truth. Okay, let's see. So there we have it. That's what the summary is. Yeah, Jesus is king. I like that. There we go. Absolutely. Like the people posting about Jesus, he's also the truth. And there's some truth that leads to an accurate scientific explanation of Grand Canyon based only on the hydroplate theory. And yet it's being kicked to the curb, which is very sad. And so with that, we're going to sign off. Hopefully we'll see you down the road as we continue this journey for the truth. This is our journey, taking a look at the hydroplate controversy, the plagiarism controversy, and I think that's why a theory that makes accurate predictions is being ignored. And that's really a tragedy. It's a dark day in science when a theory that makes accurate predictions is not considered. So with that, we are going to let you go and thank you for the journey through this. We will be starting probably in a few more minutes, taking a look at the Grand Canyon overview. So I hope you're enjoying this or learning as much as I am, and hopefully the truth will prevail, because this has to be a grassroots uh, um, change. It's clear that the people on top may want things to change, but there may be resistance in the organization. So hopefully we'll see you down the road, and may God bless your efforts in